Dan is my former PhD student. He is Hallam boy and man. He did his bachelor's here, his master's, and then we got him funded PhD, and then he got his lectureship. This piece of work that he's going to present on the finances of cricket, he presented at the European Association for Sport Management Conference earlier this month in Seville, where, as ever, with Dan and with Rob Wilson, their work on professional team sports is always very well received. And I have a particular vested interest in this piece of research because it replicates a piece of research that I did at the start of my career in, was it 1996, Dan?
96 or 97, I think.
Yeah, Dan was probably even born then. It was one of the first bits of research I ever had published, looking at the financial statements of the 18 county cricket clubs. And Dan and Rob and Robbie Miller in SPARC have replicated that work 20 years on, and we'll show you, Dan will show you just how much they haven't moved on in terms of their dependency on central funding, but it's much better delivered by Dan than by me. So,
Thank you,
to
Simon.
you, Dan.
Thank you very much. Thanks for having me and for taking the time to have a look at this. Simon, as always, has delivered a great introduction, so I'll just sort of build on that a little bit, and I'll come on to the study itself in a minute. There's just a kind of couple of things in terms of where this has been driven from, and as Simon said, I'll just show you the lead into this. This was kind of a sort of, it all came together very nicely, and what we try and do here with this research is also to kind of make the loop between teaching, research, and then pushing that out there into the wider public as well. So this actually came about before we had the conversation with Simon and said, do we want to update this piece of work that had not been done for 20 years or so. It actually came about through a conversation with a guy at BBC Sport as well, Andrew Joa, and this was the kind of research embedded into the media that we ended up pushing this. This is the kind of, in layman's terms, story, and you can have a look at that, and there's a couple of QR links at the end to the paper as well. We didn't mention take that in the academic paper, obviously, because why would you? But that was the headline that they decided to go with. So it was based on that. We took it and developed it as a paper, brought Simon in and did some of the revamping stuff from 20 years ago, and here's the end result. So this was presented a couple of weeks ago, and it's interesting if anybody does end up watching this in La Trobe. There is a line in there that's now out of date, because after the amazing summer of cricket that we have had, obviously the Ashes didn't quite work out in our favour, and this was delivered, I think I'm right remembering, Simon will correct me if I'm wrong, just before the start of play on the 4th test, which was just after Headingley and Ben Stokes' heroics, and we thought we were going to win the Ashes and roll the Aussies over, and that was easy. Didn't quite turn out that way, because Steve Smith came back and then hit a double 100, but anyway, the message still stands, and we had a good laugh with the Aussie colleagues over in Seville as well. Just for those of you that might not know me, I can see mostly friendly faces in the room, but in terms of how this kind of fits with what I do, I mentioned the link between teaching and research, which is something we're obviously very keen on. 90% of my job is teaching, and it's trying to get this research into teaching wherever possible. So, kind of building on my PhD and Simon's tutoring and mentoring throughout the years, we're now looking at kind of 3 key areas research-wise. So financial health analysis in professional team sports, competitive balance in professional team sports. The other presentation we delivered in Seville was around competitive balance in Asian football, looking at the top 5 leagues there. But I played the home card for this seminar series and off the back of what has been a fantastic summer of cricket and how we can sort of build on that. And a little bit around managerial change as well, the impact of. So the impact on performance and how teams make decisions around changing or not changing the managers linked into strategy. And there's a whole host of papers and chapters and things around that we've developed over the course of the last few years. Mostly in football to start with, but then we've since branched out into rugby union, rugby league, cricket is what you'll see today. A little bit around competitive balance and the impact of regulation on competitive balance. So a couple of papers around financial fair play and the impact that's starting to have. And then obviously the managerial sack race, which we're all, anybody that follows football will be constantly aware of and how that's affecting performance, and there's publications linked to all of this. The media work comes off the back of that, and kind of that's great to push to the students as well. And to kind of finish the loop, I'm a few numbers away from quite a decent milestone on Twitter, but given there's only 18 people in the room and some of those already follow me, we're not going to hit that anytime soon. But the work that we do, we push onto the social media platforms for both the course and our personal ones as well. So it's all there if you want to go and take a look. So this study, I'll just give you the overview of the key findings really. It'll follow a kind of traditional journal article approach, and then we can take any questions, and as I say, there is a QR code embedded to the paper. But Simon hit the nail on the head. This piece of work was done 20 years ago, over 20 years ago now, and nobody had really looked at cricket in an academic sense since, certainly not from a financial health perspective. And all the warning signs in Simon's paper and Gregory Wilkinson Riddle in 1997 suggested that the clubs were over-reliant on the annual grants given to them by the ECB. So for those of you that aren't aware, the English Cricket Board give out a central grant to each county team, of which there are 18 at the minute in English cricket. Around that time, additionally, an extremely low proportion of clubs' total revenue came from the paying public, especially watching county cricket. The levels of debt at some clubs were unsustainable, and without the ECB handouts, many clubs would cease to exist as a going concern, e.g. a financial business in their own right. And those of you that perhaps still follow cricket and have a county affiliation are probably looking at that thinking, yeah, that's now. And that was kind of one of the main findings in this paper, was not a lot has changed when you see some of the results. That was quite staggering to us, and also gives us more warning signs moving forward, off the back of a summer where England have just won the World Cup. We've had a great Ashes series, and now's the time for the ECB to kind of capitalise on that momentum. But there are really big financial issues in the county system still. Hence, a couple of years ago, we set out to have a look at this and collected some data. As I said, from a participation perspective, cricket is second to only football in England. So there is a big participation grassroots level underneath this county system. Yet the professional game has not seen the revenue growth that football has seen. All the money's been into football, all the money's been into the Premier League in football, Sky Sports, etc. And you've seen how that league has grown. There have been major developments in cricket, arguably too many. We keep reinventing cricket in different formats. We have a new 100-ball format coming in a franchise-type model. So it'll be interesting to see how that plays out. And as I say, 20 years on, we thought this was worth another look to see what, if anything, had changed. And there's very little academic literature on cricket as well. I don't think there's any other accountants in the room other than Simon, and I will always bow to his superior knowledge on this anyway, but just for those of you that are interested in this, there's a riveting chapter in my PhD if you're interested in the contested nature of accounting theory, and why wouldn't you be? But it is a contested field. This is what we're basically saying. There is a lot of narrative around accounting that says, well, actually, who sets the rules of accounting? It's accountants. So there is a kind of qualitative social aspect to it that we've not really been aware of because we just take the numbers at face value. And accountants still set the rules. So there is this kind of argument that any regulations should also consider social norms, market competition. What is better in the context of accounting regulations depends on the interest group, so you have kind of motives around that as well. However, despite all of this, there are financial statements there. They do have to be put forward into the public domain in a regulated way. They do provide as good a true and fair view as we can get. Hence, we argue, and certainly in this paper, that they are robust enough for analysis. But there is still some sort of divide in the field around that. That's the kind of theoretical framework that sits above what happens in professional team sports. So there's a sporting framework to this from a theory point of view. There's also an accounting framework theory as well. What we're focusing on here is more the research that we push to the students and the sessions and modules that I deliver on. So what we're looking at here is the word competition. We want in our sporting competitions, we want clubs to be equally matched in theory. We want clubs to be equal on the pitch in theory. And the leagues have been structured in certain ways across America and in Europe to kind of fit or not to fit that model, depending on where your argument stands. There are convergence in certain features, but some sports do take elements of both structurally, which does have an impact on competition and indeed finance. And cricket's a little bit unique in this model because cricket is unusual in many ways when you look at that theory. It's the only team sport in the UK where clubs receive a central grant funding. There are a number of structural changes, as I've said, and it's historically taken both elements of both models. So to give you an example of this, if we look at some of the key developments. In 2000, the league county cricket system in England decided to split into two tiers. Historically, it was all one league, no promotion, no relegation, closed league setup, and then they decided to put promotion and relegation in. One of the other biggest factors, and I mentioned this in terms of where we're at now in 2019, was those of us that can remember the 2005 Ashes series, a really seminal moment in English Test cricket. England won the Ashes and then the ECB sold everything to Sky. Sold all their broadcasting rights exclusively to Sky Sports because the 05 Ashes series was on Channel 4. Some of us might have watched the World Cup on Channel 4 for those of us that are not fortunate enough to have a Sky Sports subscription, myself included, because I won't pay that kind of money at the minute. It's not on my priority list. So there's an argument there that by selling out, it was better for the clubs at the time, but it might have harmed the game in the long term. And I think we've kind of seen that as well. If you look at where attendances have gone since 2005, they've gone down, unfortunately. If you look at where some of the finances have gone, in a minute I'll show you some of the findings, they've gone down. So now we're at another point where in 2018 a record broadcast deal has been signed, 1.1 billion. The central grant money to clubs is going to increase again. And this time though, cricket is back on the BBC and they're going to show some of the new franchise competition, which is the 100-ball format. And also, obviously now, we're at a point where England have won the World Cup. Just missed out on the Ashes, although we didn't technically lose. But didn't technically win also. So there is some real gains, we think, here to be made, but there are key issues. Just a brief look at the methods. We're looking at financial data, primarily. We took all the accounts that we could find for a 3-year period, which was the most recent set available. Couple that weren't available just because we couldn't get the data from them. We had to go direct to the counties and that took a little bit of time. And Northamptonshire did not reveal the total figure of ECB grant income that they received, so a slight anomaly. And we measured this against some key areas of performance. So just to show you a couple of those, what we have in English cricket at the minute is still a system, arguably, where you have the haves and the have-nots. And the haves are the ones that host test matches on a regular basis, been given test match awarding status. And then the non-international grounds tend to struggle a little bit more. Surrey were the standout club in terms of average revenue over the time period, and that's primarily linked to their non-cricket revenue. So what they do with their catering and their events facilities, which you'll see again in a minute, the figures to break down Surrey in a little bit more detail. So this was a kind of polarisation between those that host Test cricket and those that don't. The other issue is that if you remove the ECB income from the previous slide and the previous data, you get even further sort of warning signs that these clubs are not quite sustaining themselves and are more reliant on some of that money as well from the ECB. Particularly if you look at somebody like Middlesex, for example, Sussex, Somerset, Essex, Worcestershire, almost 50%, and in some cases more of their revenue comes from the ECB. And we would argue that that is unsustainable moving forward, because what if that money was ever taken away? What if the model changes? What if the ECB fall into financial trouble? So this was showing us some quite severe warning signs to start with. Further compounded by the fact that revenue is one thing, but profit and or loss is another thing completely different, and that was an even more stark picture in terms of only one club in this study for this time period, Glamorgan, would have made a profit without the ECB income. So really clear signs here that clubs are very dependent on this revenue stream, as they were 20 years ago. Just for the purpose of this presentation in time, we could have done a lot more with this data, but we've just pulled out two key case studies that we think kind of show the contrast. Surrey, where their dominance was built on the foundations of guaranteed international test cricket. The last test of the summer is always traditionally at the Oval. They're in a good place geographically in London to capitalise on the market for evening T20 matches and the crowds that they attract. So they can charge a premium for that, and they've done that in the past as well. But that's been the big driver for them. Two things. One is seizing that opportunity through the T20 matches and Friday nights, and the other one, the graphic's not great here, but that's their Oval events facilities, which is an offshoot of the cricket club, and that accounts for 46% of their revenue. That's non-cricket stuff. That's conferencing, that's other events. It's not related to anything in terms of the cricket club, the test matches, etc. Contrast that to Durham, who were awarded in 2013 a groundbreaking Ashes test match, but borrowed heavily against an investment in the ground from the council. The council couldn't sustain it and didn't want to be involved in the club when things went bad. The ECB had to put together a bailout package in 2016 for Durham, at which time the average debt ratio for the organisation was around 82%. Anything north of 70% should flag as a cause for concern. So you can see some of the challenges. And whilst the ECB give the central grant money, in this case they also had to bail Durham out, and that caused a bit of friction between some of the other clubs as well. So to kind of discuss and conclude for a couple of minutes and see where this could go in the future, what we said at the outset was the over-reliance on the grant income is still there. Arguably it's more prominent as well, which is a further cause for concern, particularly for those counties that don't host international test cricket. And the Notts chairman's been very vocal about this, for example, even though Trent Bridge have some fixtures and have some of the Ashes fixtures from time to time. He says without that test match status, they would really struggle as a going concern, as a business. So this is not just us saying this, these are chairmen within the game, and you'll see this across other sports as well, living hand to mouth on a daily basis. We know there's been positive developments. We know that these formats have been good for the game. We think the 100 might be good as well. The foundations are there for it to be good, but there remains a problem with the financial health of the county game, which is the kind of focal point. Aside from the test match arena, obviously, and particularly those that do not or cannot host test cricket. So what did we suggest, just to conclude on this slide? The ECB will still face challenges in the short and medium term. It is an unusual sport because of the nature of it. The ECB works on a 4-year cycle. Obviously that involves Ashes, home test matches sometimes. India touring is a big revenue boost for the ECB, but you have these periods whereby it's a little bit flat because some of the touring teams are not as lucrative in financial terms for the ECB. That money then, some of that trickles down to the counties, but the county game is really struggling with attendances, and we argue that the ECB here in actual fact, should be attempting to make the club self-sustainable rather than propping them up. The central grant money is nice, but what if that's removed? And we think that the club should be planning for that, or at least looking to work with the ECB more closely, which is the second recommendation. And the first one is to try and maximise those secondary income streams as well, like Surrey are doing. We want to do some follow-up stuff with this and push it a little bit further. We're trying to get in touch with some of the clubs around some qualitative research. We know that there'll be a bit of evaluation, hopefully, on the 100 in time when that develops. So this is a kind of growing body of research, but that's where we're at the minute, and the overall point here, as I say, is 20 years worth of changes in the game, and not a lot has changed at all, really. And if you want a little look at the academic article that's been published, then hopefully, if I follow Leighton's instructions right, that QR code should just drop right in. Thank you very much.
Thanks, Dan. Thank you, part of it there. We're running tight on time. Anyone got one quick question while John sets up? Simon?
Thanks, I was really interested. Lots of information. There's a cricket club every other Friday night, this kind of thing's discussed. And the main conclusion was there's just too many counter sites. There's just too many. So I suppose that's the question then. Lots of comments to back it, to extend it, but are there just too many counter sites?
It's a great question. I suppose if you're arguing from a competition point of view, potentially.
I'm not for financial, just carrying on from the talk.
Yeah, I think you get this balance between kind of sporting integrity and competition and then financial performance, so that kind of on-pitch, off-pitch battle. So I suppose the argument is, for the sake of the game itself, 18 is a good number, and arguably you'd probably be looking to put more in there if you could really drive it forward. But that does create its challenges. Some of the follow-up work we want to do here is around competitive balance of those leagues, and can we pinpoint whether or not there's a right league size, which we've tried to do in football a little bit. And our suggestion there is that the Premier League is too high numbers-wise. It should be reduced. So that would be a really interesting piece of research. I think what's clear from here is that the clubs need the ECB, and our question is, what if that's not there? And there'd be a lot of clubs going close to the wall if that was removed.
An alternative way of looking at your question, Simon, is, as Dan says, technically we didn't win the Ashes and Australia retained them, and they do that from a basis of 6 state teams and a population of a third of ours. So
At that level, we'll have other, that's what I'm saying about, the general conclusion on Friday, you have that Premier League, and you'll still have mortgage or whatever. So it won't be in that light. And in terms of that feeder for the test fee, they just go to one of those 90. Those players you can still be brought through, because of course you can't get rid of it altogether. So have no foundation to test.
So Matt Nicholson, if you're watching in Latrobe, a quick win would be to do a similar study with us, looking at the Sheffield Shield teams versus the English Caddy Championship. So, thanks Dan.
Yeah.